Hello, my name is Amy Barfus, and today I will be talking about emotional and behavioral disorders. For this presentation, I will be going over the definition of emotional behavioral disorders, some of the characteristics that make this disorder identifiable, some of the barriers that students with these disorders face, and some of the accommodations that teachers can make for these students in the classroom. And then I'll wrap up at the end with a short conclusion. But before I get into more about what emotional and behavioral disorders are, I wanted to share a quote by Dr. Eric Jensen, who is a neuroeducator and author. He said, "There is no separation of mind and emotions. Emotions, thinking, and learning are all linked." Based on this, I want to pose a question that hopefully you can think about as I go through this presentation. And the question is, what role does emotional health play in education, especially for students with emotional and behavioral disorders? So think about that as I go through and hopefully be able to find an answer. To start, I want to share the definition. Emotional and behavioral disorders, or EBD for short, which is how I'll be referring to it throughout the rest of this presentation, is an umbrella term that describes psychological disorders that impact a student's emotions, moods, and behavior. The definition itself is pretty vague and encompasses a wide range of things, and so it's more helpful to look at the specific characteristics that are used to identify emotional EBD. So to begin with that, IDEA defines EBD as a disability that exhibits one or more of the following characteristics over an extended period of time. There are 5 characteristics that IDEA lists specifically, and they are an ability to learn that is not explainable by intellectual, sensory, or health factors, an inability, to build or maintain interpersonal relationships with peers and teachers, inappropriate behaviors or feelings under normal circumstances, a general pervasive mood of unhappiness or depression, and lastly, a tendency to develop physical symptoms of fears associated with personal or school problems. So keeping that in mind, I wanted to look at more specific additional characteristics that these students can exhibit, because the definitions that IDEA gives talks about things kind of vaguely, but what does it actually look like? What could the student actually be behaving like that could potentially lead to a diagnosis? And so some additional characteristics could be maladaptive coping methods, impulsivity, language deficits, poor academic performance, internalizing or externalizing, which essentially means that the behaviors that they're exhibiting could be something that they're internalizing, which would look like maybe withdrawing from peers, moodiness, fatigue, things like that, things that stay more within themselves, or the behaviors can be externalizing, which is the opposite, which could be more like throwing tantrums, fighting, acting out, being aggressive, things like that. And then the last thing I wanted to mention specifically is that EBDs can arise from genetic, social, and environmental factors. With EBD, because EBD itself is an umbrella term, there are categories or kind of subdiagnoses of EBD. And these can be anxiety disorders, bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, psychotic disorders, eating disorder, conduct disorder, or schizophrenia. So you can see just from this list, it can really encompass a very wide range of disorders. So to kind of help put this all into a more realistic situation and help visualize what this could look like in a classroom setting for a student, I came up with 2 short case studies that I wanted to share and that you can think about as I go throughout the rest of the presentation. The first one is for a boy named Alex. Alex is a 9-year-old boy who consistently displays extreme mood swings in class, often going from quietly working to suddenly lashing out verbally at classmates or teachers when frustrated by a simple question or minor setback, sometimes even refusing to participate in activities or withdrawing to a corner of the room, causing significant disruption to the learning environment and impacting his relationships with his peers. So that's the first one. And the second one is for Sam. Sam is a 14-year-old girl who had done well in school previous years, but is now struggling through the entire current year. She has stopped participating in class, often sleeps during the lessons, and her grades have dropped. She is moody and has become pessimistic in her outlook toward life. She has complained of feeling worthless. Recently, friends reported that they had seen Sam drinking with a group of older students after school. So keep these two students in mind. Just right off the bat, you can tell from Alex's case study that his behavior is more externalizing, while Sam's is more internalizing. And as we go through and kind of talk about the barriers that students face and some of the accommodations, we'll come back to these case studies. So keep them in mind. So next, we're going to talk about the barriers. Before we get into those, I would like to share another quote. The research is clear. Emotions determine whether academic content will be processed deeply and remembered. That was by Mark Brackett, the author of Permission to Feel. So I wanted to share this quote because I really liked that he emphasized how integral emotions are into academic performance. And so when we think about the barriers that these students are facing that are dealing with emotional disorders, it's important to remember that they go hand in hand. So some of these barriers that these students are facing are lower graduation rates and higher dropout rates, less time in a general education classroom. They're more likely to face long-term suspension or expulsion. These 3 points I'm going to talk a little bit more on the next slide because I have some statistics I want to share. But the other barriers I've found were they are disproportionately disciplined. There are stigmas surrounding them. Going back to the characteristics, it was important. I really want to note that it says that they are caused by genetic, social, environmental factors. There are sometimes with children that are dealing with behavioral or emotional disorders, there can be a lot of stigmas that they are abused, that they are just naughty children, things like that. And although that can be part of it, or that can sometimes be the case, that isn't always the case. And so it's important to keep an open mind. Some of the other barriers that they face are expressive and receptive language disorders. It seems more often than not, students with EBD also have language disorders, which obviously adds a whole new level of complexity to accommodations and things that they need to be successful in school. They are more likely to be both victims and perpetrators of bullying. And lastly, there's gaps in resources and support. And when I was researching, it seemed like one of the main problems was there were lacks of resources and support, but also there was inconsistencies. And so in some areas, schools were providing resources and support and teachers were getting educated on how to deal with students with EBDs, and other times they weren't. And so there was just a lot of inconsistencies. So going back to the first 3 bullet points, I found these statistics from Education Week Research Center, analysis of a center idea data from 2018, and this is where all these facts came from, but it says in 2016, 25% of students ages 3 to 21 with disabilities who received suspension or expulsions for more than 10 days were categorized as having an emotional disturbance, though they only represent 6% of the special education population. So again, it's very disproportionate for how little of the population, special education population they are, and how much discipline and disciplinary actions that they're receiving. If you look over at the chart, the orange bars represent the students with EBD specifically, while the blue bar represents all students with disabilities. And you can see that there is far less number of students who are spending more time in the general education classroom with EBD than the students that have other disabilities. It's the same thing with graduation rate. Students with EBDs are less likely to graduate than other students with disabilities. But on the flip side, they are more likely, almost twice as likely to drop out compared to other students with disabilities. And so the statistics are a little alarming and really kind of demonstrate some of the difficulties these students are facing educationally. So how can we help them? That's the main question. We know that there's barriers. We know that they face difficulties, but the main thing that we need to learn is how to accommodate. So again, I have another quote. This is from Kate Middleton. She says, "A child's mental health is just as important as their physical health and deserves the same quality of support." I really like this quote because we know that in schools there are PE classes that really focus on helping students be physically healthy. And I just wonder if we could put that same effort and intention into providing help with students' mental and emotional health, how much better students, especially those with EBDs, but all students could be educationally. But with that, for students with EBD specifically, some of the accommodations I came up with are first SIOP. So we learned about that recently. That is obviously the observation protocol that was kind of geared more towards ELL students, but because there is such a high percentage of EBD students that also struggle with language disorders, integrating some more language learning and different ways of presenting language and giving them different opportunities to share things using different language can be really beneficial to them. The second point is social and emotional learning. This is basically the social and emotional equivalent of SIOP. So this is a protocol that's geared more towards setting goals and teaching social and emotional learning within the school curricula. And so I have a slide after this that I want to talk a little bit more about on that. And the rest of these accommodations could theoretically fit under the umbrella of SEL, but I just want to talk about them individually anyways. So they are structured emotional support, so just providing ways for students to cope with their emotions that is a structured, expected way. So I mean, this could be a behavior chart or just things like that, just something that's structured that students know will provide them support in the classroom. Avoiding labels, going back to the stigmas, just making sure that we're not telling these children that they're naughty, that they're bad, that they're crazy, or stigmatizing them. Creating routine, just creating consistency. Self-expression journals. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Freedom Writers, where she let them write whatever they wanted to write, and they could be put on one side of the shelf if they wanted them to keep them private, or on the other side if they wanted the teacher to read. And so that could be something that'd be really helpful. Check-ins and check-outs, just making sure to make an intentional effort to check in with the students each day when they come into class. A timeout area in the classroom, setting specific goals, teaching positive self-talk, build social emotional vocabulary so students know how to verbally express what they are feeling inside. And then the last one I thought was really interesting. It's exemplify self-regulation. I got this from an article that was published by the U.S. Department of Education in lieu of COVID. And it was all about supporting child and student mental health. And in that article, they specifically mentioned that teachers who take the time to self-regulate and to de-stress and keep themselves mentally healthy can help teach students how to also be mentally healthy themselves. And so I just really like that. So just touching really quick on social emotional learning. So this is just a methodology that emphasizes the importance of understanding and managing emotions, building healthy relationships, and developing social awareness within school curricula. And you can see it has 5 components of that: self-management, self-awareness, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. I'm not going to go into that too much because that's not really the focus of this presentation, but it is something that's really interesting and that could definitely help with students with EBD. So just to kind of wrap up, I wanted to go wrap back around to Alex and Sam. So now that we've kind of talked about the different barriers that they could be potentially facing and some accommodations we could make, if you look at Alex, what could we do for him in the classroom? He was having more externalizing behavior and he was lashing out, he was getting frustrated. So maybe for him, it would be beneficial to create a timeout area and to help intentionally build social emotional vocabulary so that when he was starting to feel frustrated, he would know how to best verbalize it and how to ask for help or how to request needing time away. And then he could have a specific area in the classroom that he could go to without disrupting the class that could help him give it time to cool down. For Sam, she was having more internalizing behavior. Perhaps for her, something that would be really helpful would be making sure to check in with her first thing at class to see how she's doing that day and to set reasonable expectations or goals for her that day, knowing that she deals with fatigue and other issues. And maybe because she is more withdrawn and she doesn't seem to want to vocalize and participate as much, maybe a self-expression journal or giving her a chance to write out some of her assignments instead of having to participate orally and things like that would also be great accommodations for her. So to conclude, just really briefly, emotional and behavioral disorders make up the smallest population of students with exceptionalities, but these students face some of the most difficulties in the school system. Integrating social and emotional learning into school curricula could positively impact not only students with EBDs, but all students. And it could help prepare them for life beyond school because emotional and mental health is important always. And so that's my presentation. These are the sources that I use to find my information. And I want to thank you for listening, and hopefully you were able to learn a little bit more about emotional and behavioral disorders. Thank you.